if anybody who cannot make it today wants to see, we can share it later on. All right, so first I'm going to go over the itinerary. First, we will do a little short introduction so that you guys can meet us, the executive board. Then each speaker will do a short presentation, and then we will open up the floor to questions. So I'll let Jamali, you can start. No? Okay. All right, so I will just introduce them. So Jamali is our co-president. Caitlin Murray is the other co-president. I am the secretary. And then Fiona is our social media coordinator. And so we will start with the presentations. Ms. Emily Dellone is up first, so give me one moment. All right, so Emily Dellone was born and raised in Frederick, Maryland. She attended Virginia Commonwealth University, where she graduated cum laude with a Bachelor of Science in criminal justice with a concentration in forensic investigative studies. She's now in the first year of her master's program here at Loyola, studying forensic pattern analysis. And right out of her undergrad, she began working at the Baltimore City Police Department as a crime laboratory technician for the Crime Scene Sciences and Evidence Management Unit. And there she plays a role in maintaining the chain of custody for evidence coming in and out of the department. So Emily, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Lexi. So I'm just gonna jump right into the presentation. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me and how I got to be in the position I currently am in at Baltimore City Police Department. I originally started as a Montgomery County Police intern when I was a senior in high school. I was assigned to the Traffic Operations Division, where I worked alongside officers conducting DUI checkpoints, as well as responding to collision reconstruction unit reports, which would be fatal traffic accidents. From there, I moved to the crime lab, still as an intern, and in the crime lab, I worked for the drug vault. From there, I was invited to be part of the training and education division, where I role played for new recruits at the academy. So the picture that you see is one of the role playing activities I got to participate in. The recruits have to come in and they triage the area to see what should be addressed. From there, I went straight from high school to Virginia Commonwealth University, where I got my Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice with a concentration in Forensic Investigative Sciences. My sophomore year of my undergrad, I went to University College of Cork, where I studied osteology. So the picture in the middle is when I was studying the difference between sex and race and age of skulls. From there, my senior year of college, I applied to be an intern for Henrico Community Corrections, just so I could experience different parts of the criminal justice system. There, I was hired as a case management technician full-time, and I worked there for about a year before moving back to closer to this area so I can attend Loyola for my master's. In between my undergrad and my master's program, I attended a course at the Body Farm, what you guys may know as the Body Farm, but is the University of Tennessee Anthropology Research Facility run by Dr. William Bass. There, I attended a 40-hour course where I was able to get a certification in how to recover human remains. From there, I applied to Loyola University, where I was accepted, and I started summer of 2022. I'm about 1 year out from graduating in May of 2024. I'm getting my master's of science in forensic pattern analysis, and two of my favorite classes that I've taken at Loyola have been cold case investigation with Dr. Rivers, who's joined us today. And I was able to investigate a cold case that was from my hometown of Joshua Crawford, and was actually able to bring new insight to the victim's family. So I was able to communicate with the victim's family and bring new ideas to the table for them. And then my second favorite class is firearm and tool marks. If you ever have the chance to take a class with Whitley Mayo, I really recommend it. She's an amazing professor. In that class, I use the comparison microscope, as you can see, to compare the cartridge case that's on the left. Those are actually two cartridge cases that, I don't know if you can see the line at the bottom, but I was comparing them to see if I could identify them. And then we actually went to the shooting range. So that is the picture in the middle. So September 12th of last year, I started my first job right out of college at Baltimore City Police Department. I work in the evidence management unit. I am a crime lab technician. The evidence management unit is a part of the forensic science division. We are a 24-hour, 7-day operation, just like crime scene sciences are. Our sole purpose is to maintain chain of custody as well as the integrity of all evidence and property coming in and out of the EMU. We follow several standards, COMAR, IAPE, which is the International Association of Property Evidence, and then Policy 1401. We're currently revamping our policy right now. So I linked in that QR code, I linked our current policy for 1401. It's a 30 some odd page document. And that's just what we follow on the day-to-day basis, our rules and regulations. There's different parts to EMU. We have the intake counter, so where the officers, detectives, or the crime scene unit submits the evidence. From there, we have the general property, and we have an off-site location because we do have over 1 million pieces of evidence in our possession right now. So we can't keep everything just at the headquarters in downtown Baltimore. We also have the money vault, which is where I work, firearms vault, drug vault, and then administrative support. We have about 2 people in each vault. And then the intake counter is a 24/7 operation, and they work all hours. A huge piece of what we do is disposition. So you can scroll to the next one. Disposition is actually an umbrella term that we use. It's the idea of what the fate of the evidence we are housing is what's going to happen with it. At the end of the day, it is the detective or the responsible officer's responsibility to decide what happens with the evidence. So they can decide that we can continue to hold it. If they determine that the property that we have still has evidentiary value, we can keep it for court, for whatever it's needed until the case is adjudicated or the case is closed. We can return it to a claimant. So if you're in a car accident and they take your watch, we can give you your watch back. Obviously, not everything is returned. Obviously, if you're arrested with 10 pounds of marijuana, we're not going to give you back your 10 pounds of marijuana. So that's where we go into the destruction of items. All CDS items are disposed. Some items can be converted to departmental use. We do have a couple shopping carts that we use to move things from room to room. Those were pieces of evidence at one point, as well as any illegally owned ammunition our SWAT team uses, and that's converted to departmental use. And then we auction off jewelry on propertyroom.com or evidenceroom.com. Like I said, the main thing that we do is just the disposition. The IPE standard is that for every piece of evidence that we receive, we should be getting rid of the piece of evidence. We are a little bit behind just because we're extremely understaffed. There's about 11,000 pieces of evidence right now that are approved for destruction. We just haven't gotten to it yet. We work every day trying to get that number down, and it just keeps going back up. So the disposition order process starts by sending an order to an officer, to the detective, to the responding officer, and they determine what they want to happen with the evidence, and they can respond, and then we act accordingly to that. So I'm just going to go into each vault. So the firearm, each vault has a different way of disposing of their items. So if you go to the next slide. So the firearm review process, again, just like every other piece of property, it starts with the disposition order. Once the disposition order has been received by the officer, they can send it back to us. Homicide firearms can be destroyed as long as the case has been adjudicated, or the officer decides that they don't need it anymore. We obviously check against IBIS to make sure there's no IBIS leads. And from there, if there is a registered owner for the firearm in the state of Maryland, we will send out a certified letter to the claimant in hopes of that they respond. If the firearm is not registered to anybody, we will proceed in destroying it. We have a lot of firearms that are considered found property. So somebody was walking down the street and they found the gun, and the serial number is visible, but it's not owned by anybody. So we can go ahead and destroy that evidence. Here is the background investigation steps that we send to claimants who wish to receive their firearms back. Just as when you purchase a firearm and you go through a background investigation, getting your firearm back, you're going to have to go through the same exact process. We just do a little bit more by comparing IBIS leads and make sure that your serial number matches with everything, make sure everything is good to go. For the most part, people do get their firearms back, but of course there are people who shouldn't have had the firearm to begin with, like felons, or the firearm that they have is illegal, like a sawed-off shotgun. They're not getting their firearms back. Like I was saying, most people get their firearms back. So once you pass the background investigation, which once we receive the packet, it only takes a couple days for our detectives to check NCIC and check any IBIS leads, and then you're able to get your firearm back. So for the firearms that you can't return, it's no longer needed for evidence or it doesn't have evidentiary value, the claimant fails to respond. So we said, hey, we have your firearm, and they haven't responded. They have 90 days to do so, or the owner is no longer allowed to have the firearm, or the firearm was illegal in the beginning. That's when we can destroy. CDS disposition, like I said, it's pretty obvious. We try to get rid of as much CDS as we possibly can. We only retain CDS evidence when it is needed. Once it's been tested, we generally try to get it out of evidence to save up some room, because the quantity that we get is pretty high. And then we're going to go into currency. So that's I work in the money vault. Every single day within the past day, I count the currency that's been submitted to our EMU division. We make sure that it's not counterfeit, and that it matches to what the officer put on what we call a 56 form, which is just a form to say, hey, I'm giving this piece of evidence to the EMU, and we make sure that it aligns. Money that is considered special, so it could be from a CDS violation, a firearms offense. Basically, as long as the claimant did not die, or it wasn't from like an officer involved shooting, we generally dispose of the currency by depositing it into a city fund. It's not a police fund, it's a city fund. And just because it's deposited doesn't mean that it's gone forever. The claimant then can work with legal affairs and the asset forfeiture team to get their currency back. So just wanted to relay some information. We do have openings for internships at BPD. The applications for the summer of this year and the spring of this year have already closed, but the fall of this year opens June. And then if you're looking to get an internship starting next year, I've linked those as well. You need a 3.0 GPA to apply, and I think it's just an essay and a Google form to fill out. And then I listed all of the units that allow to have college interns. We allow high school interns too, but I don't think there are any high schoolers for this today. And then I don't believe we're hiring for any entry-level careers right now, but we do. We're looking for a firearms analyst and a fingerprint analyst right now. So I linked that as well. And then I put my school email and then my work email. If you guys have any questions for me or you want to reach out, feel free to do so. All right, thank you guys so much. And I'm super excited to hear what the rest of the speakers have to say.
All right, so I know that you did have a Q&A. We are going to do a large Q&A at the end after everybody has finished their presentation. So without further ado, next up we have Director Lucas. Director Lucas enjoyed the first 18 years of her career with the Baltimore Police Department in Baltimore City. Beginning as a forensic scientist, she grew into the roles of supervisor and technical leader of the drug analysis unit. 3 years ago, Director Lucas transitioned to the Baltimore County Police Department, where she currently serves as a laboratory director. Director Lucas is in her 3rd semester of teaching forensic chemistry at Towson University and has gained a lot from that experience. Originally from the Philadelphia area, she and her family now live in Maryland. Outside of work, Director Lucas enjoys spending her time coaching volleyball and driving everyone everywhere.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I'm trying to see if I can put my, okay, I can see myself. I talk with my hands a lot, so I need to know if it's distracting for everyone. Emily, thank you so much. That was so informative. It's so great to hear about BPD. I loved my time at BPD. So it's so great to see the talent that is there and everything that's going on. So thank you so much. So I do not have a fancy presentation, I'm sorry, but going with the prompt of what I am passionate about and how that empowers me as a woman as far as a topic for today. And I apologize if you can hear my dog. When this turned virtual, I realized I did not have my AirPods with me, and so I ran home to try to do it from here, but my daughter has my AirPods, so I hope you can all hear me okay. So I started off many, many years ago with the initial thought of helping people. I was very interested in mysteries and everything that everyone on this call was interested in. I did look up the original CSI show, and that aired in 2000. So that was definitely not around when I started to become interested in my career. I would say that I went in with the idea to work in a medical examiner's office in some capacity. I was very interested in giving people answers to why their loved ones, what had happened to their loved ones, and solve mysteries for them. I want to encourage you through this presentation to definitely have a goal and work toward that goal, but also allow your career path to open up opportunities for you. I started off with my undergrad was in biology, and then my master's of sciences in forensic science through George Washington University, when, believe me, I think there were about maybe four or five programs out there in America for forensic science. So I struggled my first year post-grad because everything was on a hiring freeze. It gives you a really great opportunity to go ahead and apply to many different places, which I hope you are all doing even before you graduate. Just apply. You know, in our field, you will have a background check, and that will take some time. So if you can find where you are interested in working, apply there. Try to maintain an internship there, any sort of contact, ride-alongs, visits, tours, that sort of thing. So the hiring freeze lifted, and I attained my first position with Baltimore City Police Department, just Baltimore Police Department officially. And like we said, worked there for 18 years. During that time, my focus to help people changed, as it will over all of your careers. So the main focus is still to help people. With my original thought being in biology, at that time, no positions were open in biology, but I needed a job. So I spent the next 18 years in chemistry. And then the goal sort of changes. The way that for me worked out that I was helping people was to be a good employee, to do everything that I could to train, to be knowledgeable in my field, to do the work in order that my results were honest and that I was honestly working for the citizens who were paying for my job, for me to do my work. And in that way felt that I was helping people get the answers that they were needing. We transitioned then in the chemistry unit, and the technical leader position became available. At that time, I was working part-time. So, there's definitely, I feel the generation coming up is very in tune with work-life balance. And some people sarcastically say, oh, that doesn't exist. It does exist. You need to have that. I found that in a part-time work for about 10 years. And then when the opportunity became available for technical leader, that's not a part-time position. If anyone's, taken some looks at quality assurance and anything having to do with technical leading, it's just not a part-time position. I think it can be a job share situation, but I was inspired to come back to work full-time, and that's just something that I never thought that I would do to begin with. And then in that capacity and in the role of supervisor, again, the helping people focus changed for me. So now I'm making sure that the policies are written correctly and that people are following the rules, and that they're provided the resources that they needed to do their job, and training is appropriate, and all of those sort of things. So I don't know if it's just my personality or if maybe it's all of our type of personality, but when someone asks what I'm passionate about, I just say everything. To me, everything matters. You be passionate about what you're doing. Honestly, changing the glass trash box seems so minimal, but just do it and be glad about it. And it's helping the lab, and you're helping, it just be passionate about whatever you're doing. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you might not be in the right place. Maybe look for something else that's a better fit for you. It doesn't mean it's a bad place. It just means it might not be the place for you. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit, I want to talk about being empowered as a woman in forensics. And it's a little bit of an oxymoron. I'm not going to lie. So even though the majority of the field of forensics is much more prone to women scientists than men scientists. At the Baltimore County Police Department now, we're at a 65 to 35 woman to female to male ratio. So in general, that's what I see across the board. There are a lot of women in forensic science. But the majority of the forensic science, or at least law enforcement forensic science community, is embedded within law enforcement departments. That is still very heavily a male-dominant profession. So within the laboratory, I do have to say, I felt empowered as a woman because of the other people who were in the lab, my colleagues that I worked with. You don't love everyone. You don't get along. You're not best friends with everyone that you're going to work with, but that's different than empowering each other. So I will say I'm very fortunate. I was blessed to be raised in a family with, a loving situation. My mom, if I can talk about her for 1 second, was definitely a woman who came from a background that where she was not empowered, and she just stopped that where it was with her, and either consciously or subconsciously empowered my sisters and I just by being there for us, encouraging us, giving us confidence. I remember to the point where negotiating my first salary, and I thought I had asked for like a great amount that she would be proud of me for. I came back and I told her how much, and she was like, you should have asked for 10,000 more than that. Just someone who was always thought that I was valuable and what I had to offer was valuable. Not everyone has that in their parents, but you will have that in your community. And sometimes it comes from the most unlikely places. Like I said, where I grew up outside Philadelphia. I was in a blue collar family. My parents did not go to college. I took one AP class. If you can all imagine, okay, I took one AP class in high school. That is it. And I couldn't afford the test. I went to University of Maryland, biology major, and I came back to tell my high school teacher of that biology class, you know, how much that class meant to me and that I was now a biology major at University of Maryland. And he laughed at me. So from coming from such a positive environment to being laughed out for a career choice, it just reassured, you know, your validation needs to come from you and from the positive influences, and you get to choose who they are. You get to choose who you listen to. And I would say that when the opportunity to become director at Baltimore County came up and worked out, I hadn't told anyone at BPD because it was just kind of, you know how, the dance between jobs, right? Like, you're happy where you are, you don't want to upset the basket there, but I was looking for something a little bit more. And one of the people who was the strongest support for me, even though they were not involved in the process, is now Chief Dellone. And we had just an honest conversation of her concern was, why didn't you involve me sooner? Because her concern was, I could have helped you. And it just wasn't something I considered. And since then, she has just been the greatest mentor and role model. Those type of people who you're not scared to ask dumb questions, that it's a safe place. So I would encourage you along the way, you are going to reach points in forensics as a woman. And if there are men on here, I do want to be very clear. This is not an I don't like man talk. Men can absolutely be part of the support. It is really just who you choose to allow. And I see some of the men on this call, and they are absolutely fantastic in identifying talent and supporting students in general, regardless of, gender. I do just want to make that clear, but for being embedded in a law enforcement agency, you will meet adversity, and it just happens to maybe be from a man, and it happens to be from a man who is just treating you that way because you're a woman, but it's not always like that. And I would say pass this on. I reached a very low point where I was very frustrated, and I was sensitive to the fact that I thought I was being treated a certain way because I was a woman, because that's what I was told to my face. And at that point, my 15-year-old just took my face in her hands and said, if you quit, they win. And she's not talking about men. She's talking about anyone who treats someone a certain way just because of their gender, male or female or however. So, gosh, I'm like getting all choked up here. But I just want to encourage you to have your goals. Go for your goals, work hard. Honestly, pick up as many skills as you can. You will build that relationship, that reputation for yourself, and just be proud of what you do and get that validation from knowing that you're working as hard as you can and doing the best that you can, honestly. Okay, so that's all I have. And I did bounce this off of a few of my colleagues, and it was sort of a consensus that, it is a mindset and is something that really needs to come from you, and gather definitely all of that positive support that you can, but you really can't look for it outside of yourself. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I won't lie, I got a little choked up too. I'm speaking to the choir. So next up we have Dr. Ann W. Burgess, who I feel like a lot of you may know. She is a professor of psychiatric mental health nursing at Boston College, Connell School of Nursing. She received her bachelor's and doctoral degree from Boston University and her master's degree from the University of Maryland. She teaches 5 forensic courses: victimology, forensic mental health, forensic science lab, and wounded warriors in transition. She, with Linda Holmstrom from Boston College, co-founded one of the first hospital-based crisis intervention programs for rape victims at the Boston City Hospital. She's licensed as an advanced practice nurse in Pennsylvania and in Massachusetts, where she also maintains prescriptive authority. Dr. Burgess has testified as an expert witness in 30 states and has received grants and published articles on the topics of rape trauma, child sexual abuse, child pornography, serial offenders, crime classification, post-traumatic stress, elder abuse, and mental disorders. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ann Burgess.
Thank you very much. Now let's see if I can make this all work. Am I on share? Let's see. That's not coming up.
Do you see at the bottom of your, oh, you got it.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay, now how can I go to just single?
I think if you just double click on one of the slides, it should come up.
Ah, is that okay?
Yeah, can everyone see that fine? All right, perfect. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I just thought I'd show you I got my master's at University of Maryland, and there is the Spring Grove State Hospital. Good grief, I think it's still there, but that's where I began my nursing. I got my bachelor's of nursing at Boston University and went right on to get my master's in nursing. And then I taught diploma students. They had diploma students, many from University of Maryland, back here at Spring Grove State Hospital, and then moved back to Boston for my doctorate. Now, how did I get into this field? I didn't even know what forensic nurse was. I don't think we had even identified one back at that time. But I had a colleague when I was at Boston College, Linda Lytle Holmstrom, that was looking for a new research project, and it was on rape victims. And she had approached me. She was having trouble finding victims, and so I was able to help her get into Boston City Hospital, where we began our study. This was the first research study of my career, if you will, outside of my dissertation. And just to run you through several of what was current at that time, what was the culture at that time for not only rape, but for victims, etc. And I would have to say that the legal principle that was in effect then and is still in effect was written in the 17th century. And that was a judge, Chief Justice Matthew Hale, who had made the statement, an accusation easily made and hard to be proved. And he had a colleague, John Wigmore, who was very concerned with what they were calling unchaste women. So this was a study about women and what was going on in the culture at that time. And you can look at how the making a fresh complaint came about, of what they had to do to prove that the woman was an unchaste woman. And they had to have her examined by four law-abiding women. And I should mention that these women were the precursor for midwives. So we do have a very interesting setup, if you will, of how women came into the scientific era, not back then, of course, but at least have a little bit of history on that. So that's how things, and at that time when I was doing the study with Linda, is the women's rights movement. This was the second women's rights movement, her first, of course, being the right to vote. Remember, back in early turn of the century, they weren't even allowed to vote. So by 1970, the anti-rape movement was begun, and this was women that would gather together and talk about life events that they had never talked about before. And these were called consciousness raising meetings. And this was important. Women in that day didn't do this. To get them out of their houses and into an area where they could talk together was really a big step for them. So they were having these consciousness raising groups. They had New York had one, Berkeley, Ann Arbor, and it became the model for victim services. And as I get into it, from victim services, we finally get into forensic nursing with the rape kits that made a huge difference in terms of how women in science could be about. So in the 1970s, what were the clinical issues? Well, there's the Boston City Hospital, which was in a very poor district of Boston. Linda and I went in every time we were called. And I think of the danger that we had. You had to park on the street and then walk to get in. Finally, they let us park closer to the emergency room. But anyway, over a 1-year period, we interviewed 146 people. This was, as I said, the first research project between the ages of 3 and 73. Majority were women. And out of that data set, we had 26 papers and 3 books, all on a different aspect of, we had gathered that much data. And Linda taught me the Chicago style of interviewing, which is why we each would take copious notes in those days in interviewing. We interviewed everybody that came in saying that they had a complaint of rape. So it was a different model, but those of you who are interested in research, and I hope you are, we need much more research by women in science. So this is why I'm telling you my story and hope that you can apply it to your own careers. So we classified sexual trauma. That was one of the, it wasn't all, just because they came in and said they were raped, we realized that the pattern was different in each of these 3 categories. So we had the ones of forcible rape. That was what came out to be rape trauma syndrome. And then we had victims that were pressured. They weren't threatened with their life or anything. They were pressured into some type of unwanted sexual activity. And then we had the 3rd category that was sex stress. And this is where they had initially consented to something sexual, but the whole situation got out of hand and out of their control. So our rape trauma syndrome, which was one of our most well-received, I guess you would say, papers, were from 92 adult women between 18 and 73. This is to emphasize how much we need to get any work that women are doing into the media. That is very, very important. And the regular media, I don't mean your scientific papers, of course, you would write those first, but to get them into someone that is sympathetic, if you will, to the topic. And the New York Times, evidently, the one I spent the most time with was Leslie Bennett. And she, of course, you had a female writing, so that really helped. And the whole issue of safety and recovery was covered. Rape can make policy. I don't know if you remember, well, I don't expect you to remember the case of Mary Vincent, but it's a good example of a case in which a young girl ran away from home. Her parents were divorcing. She needed some time alone. And so she goes she was from Los Angeles. But look what happened. In those days, women were hitchhiking, which we never encouraged. They would come in to even into the emergency room. But Mary Vincent was picked up by Larry Singleton. She thought she was safe, obviously, and she wasn't. And what he did is he pulled over, he raped her, and then he brutally, sadistically cut off her arms and threw her over a cliff, fully expecting her to die. And why she didn't was amazing. But another car came along at the bottom of wherever this cliff was out in Beverly Hills and picked her up, took her to the hospital, and she survived. And this was important because this was a man who had been in prison for rape, had gotten released, and then he does this horrific injury to Mary Vincent. So they made policy that in terms of letting offenders out, even if they have served their sentence. So that was Mary Vincent made some contribution, I guess we could say, given that she was terribly, terribly injured. I hope by now that they have better hands for her than those hooks. I mean, that looks just so primitive. here is what I want to emphasize when I finally get into the victim counseling, because I'm a nurse and in the field of psychiatric nursing, it seemed when I talked with Linda that we would do could we do a victim counseling? I wanted to handle the counseling. Linda wanted to go into court. So we divided up the labor. Whenever you're doing, it's always helpful, I think, to do work with other people. And if you can be very careful to divide the labor so that everybody has their own particular area. And in mine, I wanted to do counseling. And this young reporter, he was only a sophomore at Boston College, and he really got it right. I was really impressed that we just gave an interview. We hadn't finished the study, and he got it right. He said, "You really want to do counseling, and is this a new nursing role?" And of course, it was. Absolutely was. This is a forerunner, if you will, of forensic nursing. So just to give you a little bit of what we did, childhood trauma, memory, and dissociation was a big area that we got into, looking at the importance of, by this time we were talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that being a disruption in the way information got processed. There's my first youngest little counseling victim. And this was, I don't have time to go into the whole case, but it was absolutely fascinating how we were able to get from this. She was only 3 years old, get the full story, got her drawings, and then worked with her. She, on her drawings, would put a very marked poke on the paper, which really turned out to be what the offender, who was a babysitter, a male juvenile, I guess he was 13 or 14 babysitter, and what he was doing to her, and parents couldn't figure out why she was acting up the way she was. And so we were able to, it was a major breakthrough looking at very young children and PTSD. Here's Cheryl Ames. Some of you, if I don't know if any of you are in the nursing field, but Cheryl Ames says that they said we should write a book on forensic nurse, a Cheryl Ames forensic nurse sometime. But I have to laugh at, here she is outside with her nursing uniform on and so forth. But anyway, that's she paved the way. And so we started forensic nursing 101, and how we put that started running that very much in the, certainly at Boston College and at University of Pennsylvania. Virginia Lynch was really the first person in 1992. There are about 38 of us that established the International Association of Forensic Nurses, which is still going very well now. And it was recognized by our American Nurses Association by 1995. So we're coming up on almost 30 years here. You've all been talking about teaching women, but this is what I had to teach the first time when I was called down to the FBI. Look at them all looking at me. They're all men. And they had called. I had gotten this call, and my RA just kind of stood in the doorway and said, "You got this phone call?" And I said, "Oh, Anna, please take it. I'm really in the middle of something." She said, "I think you better take it. It's the FBI." And all I could think of is, oh my gosh, I hadn't paid my taxes or something. I didn't even know what the FBI did at that time. So anyway, they wanted me to come down. Linda and I had written our first article, just a little article in the American Journal of Nursing on just the rape victim in the emergency ward. And you can imagine anything more simple than that. And anyway, my point in teaching you this, or in pointing this out, is the way that the FBI got hold of me was by a nurse who was also a police officer out in Los Angeles. And Roy Hazelwood had just been given the assignment that he had to teach rape investigation. And he says, "I don't know anything about rape investigation." So he was kind of moaning and groaning and complaining about this to the group of law enforcement he was talking to, and said, "Does anybody know anything about rape?" And of course, nobody was going to say they knew anything about rape at that group. But afterwards, Rita Connect came up to him and said, "There's somebody out on the East Coast, a nurse. I'm just reading this article." Rita also was a nurse and would keep her clinical skills up by going to work in the ER in the weekends. So they called me, Roy called me, and he said, "Would you come down?" And I really hesitated, because up to this point, I was just talking to women, rape crisis centers were in full swing then. And What else was I talking to? Nurses, of course, predominantly female. And I knew they were all males. And I thought, I hesitated, but I said, yeah, I'm going to come down and find out what they know about rape investigation. And by this time, William Webster had already told the Academy, FBI Academy, that they needed to be doing research, but that was pretty very forward-thinking man at the time. And he said to, this is how I got into the offender work, was he said, no shoebox research. And I thought he's very perceptive, because a lot of government, and not even government, but other kind of research, because all the stuff just gets put in a box and put on a shelf. He says, none of that, you've got to produce. So that's how we got started. And so here we go with understanding our sexual killers and their victims. I got into this because Bob Ressler wanted to pick that as his topic of research. He was already going out and doing some interviewing of offenders in the prisons. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, well, I've got to teach criminology. How can I do it if I haven't talked to some criminals? And I'm thinking, they're FBI, but it didn't dawn on me. They investigate. They never did this finding, you know, they didn't talk to victims. They didn't know what necessarily to say. So that's why we started the serial killer study. And let's see, why is this not advancing? Oh, here are the for my students. On one of my final exams, I have to identify all of the serial killers. I won't ask you all to do it, but these are all of the quote, the boys that are in our study on serial killers. You've got Berkowitz up there, you got Bundy, you've got Dahmer, you've got William Speck, Richard Speck, who killed all the nurses, most of the nurses. You've got Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. You've got Wayne Gacy, you've got Charlie Manson right there. All of those were included in our study that we came out with patterns of sexual homicide. At the time, they had a category called no apparent motive. We don't know why they were killed. And that was the group we had to study. And of course, it turned out that these are all pretty much serial sexual killers. Here is one of my, I also, in this project, we studied some offenders, and I always would give this as one of my final exam things of who do we have here? Who did what to whom? This is a murder scene. And I would get the juveniles to draw what they did. And what I find here, I'll just say it because we don't have a lot of time, is this was the older sibling, the 15-year-old sibling, he's on the right, and his sister, his little 11-year-old sister, who looks bigger than he does, has more stab wounds, but they have the same color hair. So you could pretty much say these are going to be siblings. And anyway, this was one of the crime scenes that he had drawn, and it again, don't have time to go into it, very interesting of the dynamics that would play out in these juvenile offenders that we felt if they could only get them at that stage, they wouldn't turn into a serial killer.
We have an interview with Miller in an hour, and it's a bit of a drive.
You know, this is really important work. If your boss won't let you do it, then you should really talk to someone who has the freedom and resources.
I think we'll stick with it for now. It'll be slow going, but we're not ready to give up yet.
Of course not.
But it's good to get some encouragement, even if our hands are tied. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
What if? Don't. I'm just saying. Hold on. Look, I'm frustrated too.
You know that to shoot the bird?
Okay, and in closing, I wanted to show you that's for you all. Never get discouraged, because they didn't. And we were able to put together a project that we think did contribute certainly to understanding human behavior. And the other thing that I will close with is the need for mentorship. Very, very important to have someone that really nurtures you and encourages you and keeps you going. And the other is use your colleagues to the social networking is so important. All of my what should I say? I was at the right place at the right time, but I also had other nurses helping to move me on, and then later on in to get other disciplines involved. So multidisciplinary work is very important, and keeping at it and sticking with your ideas and so forth, and getting a mentor. So thank you all very much. Happy if there are any questions later on.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Burgess. If you could stop sharing your screen.
right.
No, you're perfectly okay.
There.
So next up, we actually have Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick. She is the president and founder of Identifinders International. She's worked several hundred cold case violent crimes and identified human remains cases using forensic genetic genealogy. Dr. Fitzpatrick is a member of the American Academy of Forensic Science and a member of the Vidocq Society. She has pioneered the application of whole genome sequencing to low-level and highly degraded DNA and the deconvolution of mixtures, enabling identification that otherwise were believed to have gone beyond the reach of modern technology. Dr. Fitzpatrick has twice been honored as a finalist in the International Gordon Honeywell Thomas Cold Case Hit of the Year competition. And she lectures widely in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So without further ado, I will hand it off to you, Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you guys for having me speak. I've thrown together a few slides about, my life and my career and how I came to be where I am. And it's going to be something completely different than you expect. I don't have a straight line from point A, point B. So let me share my screen, and then I'll probably make comments in whatever time I have available left over. Let me see what slideshow is the right one. Hold on. These high-tech things, they baffle me. Here we are. Let me start let me see. Can you see the slideshow?
Yes, we can.
Okay, you can see that, right? Okay, my topic is education, adaptability, perspiration, and luck. It takes everything to, everything you want to do what you want. Follow your dream, be flexible. The possibilities are more than you think, if you think. Let me see if I can get this going. Okay. First, I started out, I have a doctorate in nuclear physics from Duke University. So how did I get from point A to point B? Well, that's a question. This is a picture of the lab I did my thesis in. And the real good part that I've only recently realized is that in those days we did hands-on. The computer we used to do this was so much less powerful than my cell phone right now. And we use mag tape. I don't want to, I'm old, right? So we use mag tape. We used, I remember walking to the computer, getting ready to do an experiment. We had big board with lights flashing, and then think of Star Trek in the 1980s, master clear fill, master clear start, and you'd see this paper tape go, and there the computer started talking to you, right? So I spent many days and nights in front of this console. You see a bed to the right. I spent many nights sleeping off and on, making sure the data got through. Now this is pretty much, this lab is not used so much because now they have, user interfaces and computer really whiz bang stuff. And now the students don't talk about going up and, making sure the needle and doing the dials. They have a phrase called knobbing it. So you click and you turn the knob now, so things have advanced. This is the old lab. It's not used as much anymore. The new lab, is more sanitary, and you have operators that are doing this for you, and they go home at 5 or 6 o'clock. So, things are different. Things are a lot more humane, but the good news is I learned how to turn knobs. I learned how to stay up all night. I learned the value of data. And that's my theme. That's how I got from point A to point B, because no matter what I did, I had to understand data. And after all the knobs and all the tweaks and all of the needles were gone, I had data in front of me and I had to make sense out of it. So that's how I got from point A to point B. After I got out of graduate school, I became what essentially is cannon fodder. You always do many people when they get out of graduate school, they have a year or two somewhere while they build up their credentials and they decide what they really want to do. So I went to Sam Houston State University in Huntsville to teach on their division of chemistry and physics. I love teaching. I'm very good at it. And after 2 years, I really got tired of it because it was like big fish, small pond. I went from Duke University Research Center to a place where I had to teach a lot, and that was fine, but it wasn't enough. So, I'm really not a person that could publish and perish. That's not my nature. So I wanted to go to somewhere that wasn't required. But then again, so much teaching was required. I didn't have that space for creativity. And I wasn't really getting paid a lot. I realized my position could be a lot better. So my students went and got jobs, and one of them got a job at Rockwell International in Seal Beach. She was a homemaker, and herself could be highlighted here. She had 2 children. When they went to school all day, she went and got a degree in physics. And so when she got her degree, cum laude, she went to the library. In those days, we did go to the library. She picked up, all the companies looking for people to fill jobs. And she wound up going to Rockwell International in the satellite systems division. And when she was driving away, I basically handed her my resume out the window of the car, something like that. It was last minute. She went, turned my resume in, and I got, an interview and subsequently got hired. At that time, this was when the economy was very bad. They had tons of resumes, and when I went out there, they were joking that they take the resume, they throw them down the stairwell, and the one that was on the top is the person that got interviewed. So I was special because I had a PhD, right? I wasn't one of those engineers looking for jobs. So what I wound up doing is actually working in lasers, because nuclear physics and lasers are actually very similar. With a nuclear accelerator, you're trying to get a particle, a neutron, a proton, from point A to point B using mirrors and lenses, and then electronic mirrors, electronic lenses. You get to point A to point B, you crash the particle against something, and you look at what happens. That's nuclear physics in one sentence. So when you do lasers, you do the same thing. You start with a photon at point A, you bring the photon to point B, you use laser, you use mirrors, you use lenses. And then when you get the particle from point A to point B, which is now a photon, you watch what happens. You crash it against something and you watch what happens. It gets absorbed, it gets scattered, goes transparent or something. Same thing as nuclear physics with a neutron. It gets scattered, it gets absorbed, same thing. So I kind of took duck to water to this. And I worked on projects for MIT Lincoln Labs. I looked at light scattering measurements, models for incoming things that might attack the United States. I wrote a lot of software. Of course, the computers are developing. So I stayed there for 3 years. But you know what? This is the boring part of the story. This is the story where I had legitimate jobs. So in the meantime, moving out to California from Sam Houston to Rockwell, Seal Beach, I had fallen in love with holograms. Sam Houston had on the 3rd floor, 4th floor, they had, an optical setup that another teacher had purchased on a grant. And he had done some holograms, whatever, with students. So I walked in there and I said, I've done a hologram. Okay, I'm going to try it. And, I started understanding it. I'd go up late at, Friday at 9, 10, midnight and try and make holograms, because you got to have, no vibrations. You got to have a lot of stability. And after many months, I wound up making a bunch of demograms, which are bad holograms. So I was about ready to give up. And then a miracle happened. This university was a teaching university, and they invited a keynote speaker once a year. And that year happened to be T.H. Jung from Lake Forest College, who was the guru of holography. So he got up on a stage and he made a hologram in front of 2,000 people and in an auditorium. And I couldn't do them at midnight on Friday night in the physics building when nobody was around. So I went, oh, wait a minute, I can do that. Well, it took me 5 years, and I told you I can do that. But I was so fascinated because holograms are a combination of perception, physics, chemistry, psychology. I mean, I'm a very broad interest, and this all came together. So out I go. I actually get a job based on the fact I held a laser in my hand at Sam Houston and tried to make a hologram. I got a job at Rockwell International in their satellite systems division. I was scared to death. I said, oh my God, these people are smart. What am I going to? I turned out I was smart too. I didn't know that. So anyway, I moved out to California, and the very first thing I did, I built a holography studio in my lab. Yes. And here is me in my garage lab with my laser, my first laser I bought. It was $3,000 in 1984. Is that right? Yeah. And, little doodad, little optical type things. I built the optical table. It weighs half a ton. It's that box has it weighs more than that because the sand, the box is full of sand to damp out vibrations. That's about half a ton of crushed quartz sand with a magnetic top that's tied down to the box. So it's on inner tubes. It's on cinder blocks. It's everything you need, hopefully, to damp the vibrations in your garage lab with an alley of cars going back and forth right in front of it. All right. So I did it. I would work all day at Rockwell designing satellites and lasers, whatever I did there. And I'd come home and work in my lab all night. So I educated myself. I loved it. I mean, this was, people would say, what do you do? I'll go and work in my lab at night. And if there was a screwdriver somewhere, the reason it was there is because I left it there. It wasn't because somebody stole it from another lab and that was mine. So this is more pictures of my lab. I also had like a thing that hung from the ceiling that had, could make it dark inside of the dark garage. You can see the inner tubes, you can see the cinder blocks, you can see these are tie rod. We had another layer of cinder blocks that were pressed together to make a concrete slab. And eventually I moved into my house. I had a dark room installed in the back so I could do my own processing, running water, and do the darkroom type stuff. Because in those days we used plates. We didn't have electronic ways to capture holograms. And I remember moving to my house. I had to have my friends, they came and helped me move. And it turned out they had to ask, why are you moving a half a ton of sand to your house? Why don't you just get some more sand, right? Well, I said, this is special sand. And they didn't quite understand what special sand was, but good thing they're still my friends. Okay, so time went on, and in the meantime, Rockwell, everything slows down. I'm bored to death. I'm designing lasers for satellites and radar. And 3 of my friends come in one day and they say, we just went on an interview with this company called Spectron Development Labs. It's in Costa Mesa, which is, what is it? Not too far from my apartment. And they have the top people in holography in this company. And I went, why didn't you tell me? I raced immediately to my phone, grabbed it and said, I gotta come, I've got to interview, pounding. Okay, so they let me in, and 6 months later, after nagging them mercilessly, I got a job at Spectron Development Labs. And it turned out when I went on that interview, I also the next day went house hunting, and I wound up getting a house within walking distance of this company. And when I got a job, so that never happens in California. You have people that commute 100 miles to work. I could walk a half an hour and get there. Now I drove, because I didn't want to get to work looking, like I walked for half an hour, 45 minutes, but it was right near my house. So it was meant to be. It was meant to be. And I started working with the top names in holography all over the world. They would come, the people lived there, but of course they had connections. So this was like And it was really cool because it was more like an art colony, you know, where people were so creative and they loved art, they loved literature, they loved music. Some were, you know, loved all kind, traveled all over the world. So it was really an art colony of scientists, really weird scientists. So, you know, they would, one time I know I had a happy hour at my house and everybody came over and we had drinks and I showed them my lab and you could see the envy, the jealousy out of their eyes saying, you know, I wish I had one of those at my house. You know, I could play at night. So you play all day, you can play all night. So I began working there after I went to Rockwell. And then at Spectron, now I still have my lab, right? I did fun at night. I did things like I designed a holographic optical inspection station because I not only was doing display holography at my house, but and experimenting with whatever, but at work, I had projects to work on. One of them was this system for looking at flaws in a TOW missile warhead. And this is what happened was the TOW missile warhead, sorry, it's black there, is that it was like this canister that went on the end of the TOW missile. And they'd have like this cup, you can see it's round, and they'd have a vinyl interior. And what they do is, I kid you not, they had a row of old ladies with spatulas and adhesives coating that metal can and fitting that phenol plastic liner into the TOW missile warhead. And sometimes they didn't do a good job. Isn't that scary? So, you know, they were looking for ways to see the flaws without tearing them apart and without shooting them all to see which ones didn't work. So the way holography goes is you take a hologram of something, you keep it in place, and then you put pressure on it, you heat it, for example, and it's going to expand. If it expands uniformly, you see stripes and fringes. If it doesn't expand uniformly, you'll see bubbles and bullseyes. So this is a place where there was a flaw and we didn't have to destroy it to see it. That's why it's called non-destructive testing. So I did a bunch of things like, here's another one. This is TOW missile warhead where you can see the adhesive isn't in the body isn't right. So there you go. So I did a bunch of things like that. And then let's see. Oh, and then I became, as the company was not in good shape. So quite a few of the older scientists were leaving, the longer term scientists. And I became, I survived my way to be the principal investigator on the light laser, which was the first laser on the space shuttle. It was featured on the cover of Laser Focus magazine. So I was one of three, and I helped design the first laser on the space shuttle. Now, this was close to the end of my term there because, as I said, the company was going downhill, and this was one of its last big projects. So eventually, after being the PI on the light laser, I got laid off, and let me see what my next slide is. I formed my own company. Yes, that is an upside down logo. In preparing the slides, I could not figure out how to rotate it. And I know you all think you know how to do this. I spent a half an hour, I can't do it. The name of the company was Rice Systems. I said Rice because it's my mother's maiden name. And I said Rice because you know, I figured I'd do international work, and anybody in the world knows what rice is. I have sat down in any language, they know that. I sat down on a whole table full of Japanese scientists who could not speak English, and they can't pronounce Fitzpatrick, right? So, but when I hand out the cards and I say Rice Systems, they all went, oh, rice, 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 rice. Okay, they know what rice is. So not only was it my mom's name, it was a clever name that everybody could pronounce and know. They called me Dr. Lice sometimes. Okay, that's all right. So people started calling me Dr. Rice instead of Dr. Fitzpatrick because I couldn't pronounce my name, which was fine. So I had the company from 89 to 2005, and we did things like the first thing out the gate in 1990, I won a government contract based on my garage lab. I did several contracts based on my garage lab, and my friends were saying that defense contracting was becoming a cottage industry with me. So there you go, 50K, 6 months. What it was involved was looking at, let me see if I have, it was called non-destructive testing on high carbon composite material, high performance aircraft parts, or something like metal matrix composite, non-destructive testing on metal matrix composite, high performance aircraft parts. I did that in my garage. It wasn't successful, but I learned tons. And then we went on to I did leak testing for the FDA, or it's called the Center for Radiological Devices. And we did optical leak testing, because if you pressurize one of these pastes, these are just canisters. You pressurize a canister, if it leaks, it's going to very slowly change shape, and you can see that. I learned that interesting story for another time. Here is some of the results from my, I went into not only holography, there was another way to do things called shearography, which, holography requires 2 beams of light and they come back and they interfere. Shearography is like using 1 beam of light that's sheared with respect to each other, and you can see it works. It's much simpler and it's more workable in the lab. So I did a whole lot of work on variations on interferometry, and here are samples where you can see where defects were in aircraft panels, honeycomb aircraft panels. And so I did that for a while. Then I came across a material called bacteriorhodopsin. It's a nonlinear optical material, and it's made out of bacteria. It's the juice from bacteria, so to speak. It's optically sensitive. And this was found because there was certain scientists that was flying over in and out of San Francisco airport. Flying over San Francisco Bay, he noticed that there was bacteria, algae blooming in the bay at different times of day. And he figured out that was an optically active material. So he managed to extract from that material something called bacteriorhodopsin. It's the same thing you have in your retina. You have rhodopsin, which is a light sensitive material that generates an electrical signal and allows you to see. Well, bacteria have the same kind of chemical, and he derived that, and he made little slides with bacteriorhodopsin on it, and it was optically active. So now I could make holograms in real time. And the sensitivity of that material was what I needed, according to the lasers I had and the wavelengths of light I needed. So I started working on bacteriorhodopsin and nonlinear optical materials. So then let's see, that was just showing you the sensitivity was just about what I needed for my lasers. Okay, and then because of interferometry, we started working on optical fiber optics and how to use them in interferometry, because that meant I didn't need a big optical table with mirrors and lenses and lasers. If we could condense it on a chip, it's much smaller and much usable. So I hired a guy who was the guru in optical, in fiber optic gyroscopes, and he came to work with me. And it's a gyroscope is a device to measure rotation. Okay, so what we did was we took the fiber optic gyro, which is this big or whatever, and we condensed it on a chip with a waveguide. And so that meant the whole thing could be that big. And we got Lucent Technology to build it for us. We got a patent on it. And there was some technical limitations on it, but it was one of our masterpieces. So from standing in my garage making, nice, pretty pictures, I went to do non-destructive testing on the tow missile warhead. I went to, what else? There was, the aircraft parts, and then finally, nice little sexy devices like this. We made it even smaller. And this carried on board the detectors. That one you saw, you had to connect to the light source and the detectors. But this, you could put it all, you had to put a diode laser, which is a little teeny laser that big, and you could put it in the waveguide and have the detector on board. So we went from the whole optical table, or the fiber optic gyro this big, to the card you saw with the external connections to something that was about the size of this big. All right. So we use that, speaking of fiber optic sensors, we tried to make, we also made, here's another version of the gyroscope. We tried to look at chemical sensors. We were looking at degradation sensors. We were using those sensors for a number of things, not just the gyroscope, also contamination. Well, another thing that came up was called the ISO pen, which is, we took that, right? Everybody wants to make things smaller. This is a fiber optic tip. Sorry about the black. Sorry, a fiber optic tip. It's not just a fiber optic, it's a fiber optic bundle now. So you can channel the light into this sensor in here. And what this was, you'd put this up against the eye, suitably sanitized, and it would press on it and make an interference pattern on the detector in the back, and you could measure eye pressure with this. It was a much more convenient, quicker way of measuring eye pressure, and we did that for an ophthalmologist. So in the meantime, we're still doing the fiber optic sensors for anything, and we got pulled by Northrop Grumman onto the Jupiter Icy Moon Orbiter project to design sensors for the spacecraft. And this was going to be a nuclear powered spacecraft to Jupiter. It was going to take 20 years to get there. So the thing about it is that, I have a background in nuclear physics, right? I have a background in designing flight instrumentation through the light laser, and I have a background in optical sensing. I walked right in the door. They said, "You're hired." So I was hired as a consultant with my partner at the time to help design the sensors on the spacecraft. Now, there were 3 companies. There was Northrop Grumman, there was, I think, TRW, and there was Boeing. And I got asked by both Boeing and Northrop Grumman to join their team. I went with Northrop Grumman for a number of reasons. And there was a down select, and the Northrop Grumman actually won the $8 billion contract. But unfortunately, that was a time when NASA was being gutted and it was getting smaller. And I didn't, the contract went away, but that's fine. We did the design part of that, and the next part was going to be built to build it. So it was discontinued and reinvented later, and it went internal to NASA, called the Prometheus project. But that's fine. We got to be part of this as a small company. So we were going to design the contamination sensors for that aircraft. Okay, and then as the company, this was in the 80s when things were, just a second, let me send a note. God, I'm going to be late to somebody. Sorry about that. Okay, so then as the company, we're in the 80s, we were in a big company era, not a small company era. And so with the advent of George Bush, so the small companies got kind of chewed up. And the big companies, were doing real well. They were even allowed to apply for small company money under certain circumstances. So when that happened, I thought I had animated this, but when that happened, I had been working on a book that was my therapy, while all this was going on. I'd go home and work. And I got a contract from the Genealogical Publishing Company to do the book. This is the first book. Oh, here it is. It's all, no. Okay. So the book was called Forensic Genealogy, and it was a hobby book that was teaching people very simple scientific ways to do their genealogy, like, identifying old photographs. You have those photographs with the squiggly edges from the 60s. Well, if you put them together, they actually make a jigsaw puzzle. And if they all kind of match, then those photographs were developed by the same darkroom with the same cutting knife. So they're not necessarily the same, roll of film, but they were in the same era, the same darkroom, the same knife. If you have photographs that you hold them under black light, like the ultraviolet light you have for African violets, and they glow. They have to be from the 1950s, mid 1950s forward, because that's when they started using fluorescent dye to make the paper look whiter. All kind of tricks that didn't really require you to be a rocket scientist, but were very valuable. So we finally decided to close the company in 2005 because we were like 0 for 18. You know, we were a small company, even though well known. So in the meantime, my partner said, why don't we just publish the book and live on that and do that, and then decide on the next rocket science company. So, okay, and then the genealogical publishing company canceled the contract, and I was sitting there crying, and my partner said, well, you know, we can publish it ourselves. And I said, what do you mean? He said, my partner had worked for the United Nations for a long time. He said, I worked for a book bindery in Nigeria, and it's not that hard. And I said, I didn't even know they had books in Nigeria. What do you mean? So we wound up opening a publishing company and doing the book ourselves, and it skyrocketed. It was like amazing. I did this every day, but I guess the rest of the world didn't. So that was followed by, that changed, now I'm in forensics. Okay, there you go. And that was followed by DNA and genealogy. It was followed, we published, I used to have quizzes on my website. So 30 best photo quizzes. I'm sorry, it was supposed to be animated. And finally, the last one was only on photo identification, the dead horse investigation photo. And the cover photograph was brought to my attention. And through analysis, we've even found what day it was taken in the, I think, 1872, using all kind of clues, where it was done, where it was done, when it was done, and the position of the shadows in the street, and the fact that he's sitting in a shadow of a building that's been half built. It's a 2-story building, and only 1 story is constructed already. So it was great. So this became our last book, and and they were all hobby books, right? They were all kind of how to do things. But we had a website, and through that website, I got picked up by a number of organizations, directly and indirectly. The Armed Forces DNA Lab, I was contacted about working on several cases. The crash of Northwest Flight 44, should be 22 in Alaska. The AFDL was trying to identify a frozen hand in the wreckage that had been retrieved in the 1990s. Okay, this was like 2005. And so they had spent many years, the pilots had found the wreckage, had spent many years trying to identify which victim belonged to the hand, a hand belonged to which victim. And they finally got to AFDL, and they were down to the last 5 or 6. When I was called and jumped in, we eliminated 4. We got to that last one. We had to use mitochondrial DNA, which was from the mother's line. The victim, possible last victim, we ruled out 29 out of 30. We had to get that 30, or we made a mistake somewhere. That man was from Vermont, but his mother was from Ireland. Okay, I've done Irish research for 40 years, called all over Ireland. Finally, you know, it wasn't just calling in the phone book. I'm looking for somebody who died in, you know, who was born in the 1870s, really massive genealogy to power back. And finally, I got on the phone with a guy who said, I said, I'm looking for Conway Drum, told him the name, told him the genealogy. Guy was born in 1958. And he said, you know, I think that's my great-great-grandmother's family. Okay, the rest is history. I found one guy out of 7 billion that could give us that mito sample, and he identified that hand. I worked on the Titanic. I worked on Amelia Earhart's Navigator. I also did several Holocaust literary frauds, best-selling books that were fake about the Holocaust, because doing genealogy, we proved that the author had not been where he or she said she had been. And then also the way I started really was somebody, Hebron Investments was an international investment company, and they contacted me about finding people, you know, all over the world using unclaimed property. So if somebody had a house, they didn't pay the taxes, it went into escrow in the state, to the state, and they had 2 years to claim it. So they get me to try and find the owners. And I happen to be really good at international work because I speak several languages. taught myself Italian to be able to call Italy and tell them what I wanted enough. And so I wound up working that for them for 2 years and doing 75 cases in 30 countries and getting all of them. So this was sort of my entree into forensics, finding people who could give DNA references, or finding people who were perpetrators of fraud, or debunking their frauds, or returning their property. But in the long run, in about 2011, I decided, well, this is interesting that the genealogy community uses the same markers as the forensic community. So in 2011, while I was in Seattle for a genealogy conference, I went a day early and I went to the Seattle Police Department. And I said, you know, if you give me your Y profile from a cold case, I can compare it to the genealogy databases and come up with a last name for you. And after getting laughed out of the room on that, there was a woman there that says, wait a minute, I get it. You know, they had 2 detectives who were bored silly. And there was this woman from the DNA lab, an analyst called Jody Sass. And she said, you know, as the detectives were falling asleep and arguing with me, their supervisor told them to go talk to this crazy woman, I'm sure. The DNA analyst said, wait a minute, I get it. And there's a case that they keep coming to me for. And if these detectives come again, I will give your name on to them. And that's what happened. So the detectives contacted me, gave me the Y profile from that case. The genealogy community used the same markers to research their family names. And I came up with a name for their killer, a possible name. Now, it turned out that it wasn't the right name, because in the end, we found the killer's grandfather had been adopted, right? So the name changed. But this was the first case where genealogy was ever used. It wasn't the Golden State Killer in 2018. It was Sarah Yarborough 7 years earlier. It went cold again. We finally solved it with the more sophisticated SNP testing in 2018, but 2019, years later. But I want to tell you that I stayed on this case and I tracked the technology until it was mature enough to solve in 2019. I had multiple tests done on this DNA until the technology was there. And that's my motto. That's my strength. I follow the technology until I get it solved. Then I went, and this was not solved at the time. So in 2015, I went to the Phoenix Police Department. Again, I happened to be in Phoenix this time for a forensic conference. And I said, I have an idea. You give me the Y profile, I'll compare it to the genetic genealogy databases, and I'll try and find a name for your killer. Came up with Miller. And now they researched it. That took their case file. This was already a 20-something-year-old case. It took from 2,000 suspects to 5 Millers. And of all those 5, there was only one that you couldn't miss, that he had all of the characteristics of that behavior analysis, you know, all that. So his DNA matched the DNA at the crime scene. He is now on a death penalty trial. It's ongoing right this moment. It took a long time to get there. And both of these cases were Cold Case Hit of the Year's finalists because of just the pioneering work that I did to get this off the ground. You hear the Golden State Killer. Wow, that was the one that brought it in the news. But these are the lead ups to that. There was a prior art, a long history on that. So this is where it really started, and I was the one that started it. I wanted to say this was terrible because when it came out that the Sarah Yarborough, that I was using genealogy, it was in the papers. The genealogy community screamed, they flamed me, they disconnected me, they unsubscribed me, they'd walk down the hall if they saw me at a genealogy meeting. They hated me, but I eventually solved the case. Now who's laughing now, right? Who's laughing now? I've done other cases. I've done just recently, here's 3 cases that Somerton Man, the biggest cold case in Australia, solved it last year based on rootless hair, based on the hair of the man that was preserved from 1948, solved it using genealogy. This case was very interesting testing. The DNA was terrible. It was 50 years old. We took 6 months to worry about the DNA and get it processed right. Guess what? Once we got it into the database, we solved it in 2 hours. Can you believe that? The data was there waiting for us. This is the Bibb County hitchhiker, teenage hitchhiker in 1961, was in a car accident, car went in the river, broke his neck, drowned. Couldn't do anything. Buried him, put it in the paper, asked people if they knew who he was. Well, in 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had an exhumation, and they sent it to the conventional lab at University of North Texas to get DNA extracted. It didn't exist in 1961, let's face it. And the Texas lab got 0 because they used all the conventional information techniques. Well, we said, send it to us, which they did. We made arrangements. We sent it to a
Excuse me, Dr.
ancient.
Fitzpatrick.
I have one slide left.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and we sent it to an ancient DNA lab where they used the same techniques they used to do mummies. And we got 46 times the amount of DNA we needed to identify him as Danny Armentrout from Florida. This is my contact information. Thank you for listening. Sorry if I went over. This was sort of a hurry up and put together a slideshow because I thought I needed one, and thank you for listening.
All right, thank you so much. So we are going to now move into the question and answer section. So I guess, Dr. Fitzpatrick, I can actually do that. All right. So for the Q&A session, if you want to type some questions in the chat, we could do that. Also, if you would like to raise your hand, and then I can call on people, but just write who the question is directed to, and then your question, and we will start that. Yes, Fiona.
Hi. So I just wanted to start with asking a question to Anne. I know you guys in forensic nursing as well, but I went the opposite way. I went forensics, and now I'm thinking about nursing. So I just wanted to ask, what took you from nursing to I want to help people in forensics? How did that correlate with your nursing program?
Well, I got into it because of doing research. When I got to Boston College, after I just had finished my doctorate, and I met Linda Holmstrom, and she told me you have to publish or you can, or perish. And so I took her at her word, and we began the study. So I was already a nurse, you're right. But I was getting into victimology. It wasn't forensics at that time. Now, the nurses were collecting evidence when a victim would come in, and they were looking under the microscope, because in those days you didn't have, you only had the 4 blood types, I think. So they were actually had to find some kind of semen or something. And because the rape crisis centers wanted to get into the counseling, the nurses wanted to do something that was more, and so that's how the whole forensic nursing piece started. So right now, any nurse, as long as they have an RN, can take, it's about a 40-hour didactic course, and they can learn how to be a forensic what's called a SANE, sexual assault nurse examiner. So you have, how far along are you in nursing yet, or
No, I'm about to graduate with my bachelor's in forensics.
Perfect. Yeah, then you can go. I have several of my research assistants then go and take a nursing program and go for the doctorate. There's a DNP now, and they move you along in about 2 years. It's a really fast track because you have a bachelor's degree, or it's you've got so much ahead in terms of what our young ones are. So find a good program and get it in 2 years, and then you and then you can also be a SANE. That's always a good credential to have, and then you can decide if you want what type of forensics you want to go into.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, and then we have another question for you, Dr. Burgess, from the chat. Davis Miller asks, what is your perspective on the nature or nurture debate in relation to why criminals do what they do?
Oh, that's a great one. My work really was so focused on behavior and development. And we found in our serial killer study that you usually could find some type of the person had way before they probably even remembered it. So that's what got us into the more of the subconscious aspect, or the memory, and what memory it layers and how it gets how that gets laid down. So I think that behavior is really important in developmental phases. In terms of any genetic aspect, that's been harder to prove. They have tried to do studies, and then they always will ask whenever you're an expert on a specific case. They will do all kinds of organic measures and x-rays and so forth. It's just been very hard to get anything at a level of significance. So I think you have to go back to, it's probably both, a little bit of everything, but highly the behavior experiences that the child has, and way it doesn't get looked at. Right now we're looking at manifestos, and we're looking at trying to get into the mind, if you will, of the rather than the behavior of the offender. So that would be a good topic for you to study, get involved in. How about that? Thank you.
Yes, Caitlin?
Oh, okay. So I also see some in the chat, but I want to ask a quick question to lower my hand. Come on, there we go. I wanted to ask Emily a quick question. I saw that you took a course in forensic anthropology at the Body Farm, which is something I am also very, very interested in. I love forensic anthropology. I was thinking about going into it. Now I'm maybe like changing my mind a little bit. It seems around like a very similar interest here. So why did you go into that, and how has that helped you in your career so far, if it has helped you, and how do you use it in any way, if you do?
So I actually had gone to the Body Farm because I was still experimenting with different disciplines within the forensic science field. And even then, I feel like I'm just now, even though I've done years of schooling and stuff, I'm just now deciding that that anthropology and osteology is fascinating to me, as well as death investigation. So I applied. It's just an essay and a application, I think, for the Body Farm, and it was a week course, and you pay, it's like $600. I drove to Tennessee and I did it. It was an absolutely amazing experience. If they still have opening for, I think I just recently looked, and they still have openings for some this year. They have entry level classes. It was the coolest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. If you get the chance to do it, I highly recommend it. The worst that could happen is that you decide that maybe studying human remains isn't for you. I don't necessarily use what I learned at the Body Farm in my day-to-day career at Baltimore City Police, just because I work with evidence. But my goal is to go federal, work for the FBI, part of the evidence response team. I do want to work with human remains as well as death investigation. So if anything, it helped me decide what I am interested in, just like having my internship with the traffic division and my internship with Henrico Community Corrections. Those showed me what I didn't like. So I was able to learn what I did like.
Thank you so much.
All right, and then we have a question for Rachel Lucas from Marty. What inspired you to move from working as a director and working in labs to becoming a professor?
Hi, thanks for the question. So I'm actually currently still a director at the Baltimore County Police Department, and I only teach one class. So I'm not like a full professor. That title is even a little hard for me to admit to, but so I have always loved teaching. I teach right now the intro to forensic chemistry. My career was in the chemistry unit, and I just love any sort of new opportunity. Like I was saying before, this is a way to stretch myself. I hadn't taught before, not at this level. It has been absolutely amazing. The students are amazing. So I'm sorry if that was misleading, that I'm not a full professor right now. But I would just say keep your options open to different things. Does that help?
Yes, thank you for your answer.
All right, and then for Dr. Fitzpatrick, we have a question from Jamali, who asks what your oldest cold case is that you've ever solved.
The oldest case is probably a Somerton man from 1948. However, I should have an update for you soon because we're working on a 1937 case from Vermont of a woman with a juvenile and a child that were found that, you know, no, everybody's forgotten about. So we're going to try and bring them back to life. That's our hope. And I want to say that as cold cases go, remember, genealogy is relatively new. So cold cases might be 50, 80, 100 years old, but, you know, in general, in the long term, but genealogy cases are the oldest, probably, you know, starting with Sarah Yarborough would be 8 or 9 years old by the time they were solved. So we know there's probably in the long run no such thing as an FGG, forensic genetic genealogy cold case, because it's always evolving. Every time you put your DNA in GEDmatch or you take a direct to consumer test, it's a legacy. It adds to our ability. It doesn't just go into CODIS 1-to-1 and you're done if there's no match. You're building up the capabilities over time. So all you people listening in, if you do have a chance to take a direct to consumer test and upload to GEDmatch and opt in, please do that. It will help and it will bring the end to some of these really long-term cases that have been uphill battles. We've solved Julie Anson, that was 50 years old. You know, what is 15-year-old girl that went to borrow a bicycle one day in Naperville, Illinois. She was found stabbed 36 times, raped post-mortem and redressed in 1972. And we had the privilege to solve that in 2 hours once we had the DNA sorted out. So the DNA is tough, but we're there. You know, that's part of it that's often ignored. We did another case, Roxanne Wood out of Niles, Michigan, 1987. It took 9 months to figure that out. And we finally had the data we needed, and it was based on 5 or 6 cells of DNA of that guy's body that remained in that DNA tube in the lab after so long. So we took high risk Hail Mary play and we solved it in 4 days. So, you know, you never know. This is a game-changing event in human identification. And the oldest, to answer the original question, is 1948, but we have hope for 1937, even before that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then we have a question from Lauren. I guess this question goes out to everyone, but Lauren says that they really want to work in an FBI laboratory. What is a good way or some opportunities to start building themselves up for that career? So anybody can answer that, I would assume.
I'll take a stab at it first. That just get really, really good in your lab skills, and then pick an area, really focusing on that. So you get expert in an area, and they will want you. And you've got to get a publication out, and you can always write with one of your mentors or one of your instructors. So that's what I would advise. They will look at your history, and your history is usually going to be some kind of publication.
All right, and then thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Burgess. We are about to run out of time, so I guess I will open it up for one more question, and then we will start closing it up. So if anybody has another question, send it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, go ahead. All right, sorry, I'm just seeing the question from Jen. It said, as a neuropsychologist raising 3 daughters, always interested in hearing how other science women strike their work-life balance.
That's a very important, you have to have support. You have to have support of other people that are going to help in the childcare and things. So that's usually the most worrisome, is the raising children and keeping your house. If you don't like to clean and cook and all that, then you better have a housekeeper. That's always a good thing to have. And I would just, you have to talk with other women that have done this, and it is has to be solved. You really have to be comfortable that your home and the other aspects of your life, except for your work, are being handled well.
Yes, I agree. The only advice that I have is to let yourself change your mind, change your decision, because as your children grow up, as your career develops, it's going to be different. So just know that, you know, you try to plan out the entire thing, and you just don't have all of that information. So make the decisions with the information you have, and then let yourself change your mind, because situations are changing.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much. Thank you especially to our speakers. We did have a speaker that was unable to come today. That is Maura DeJoseph. So she just wanted me to share this message that she had. She said, "Thank you so much for inviting me to share in your panel today, and my apologies that I am not able to make it. I am a proud alum of Loyola in 1998 with Dr. Rivers as my advisor. I went on to medical school, residency, and determined that forensic pathology was my passion. So after residency, more training in forensic pathology fellowship. I am now in my 16th year of practice as a medical examiner, currently working in Connecticut, and I still love coming to work every day. If you are considering a career in medicine and have forensics interests as well, it is a great field of practice. Please do email me if you have any questions about the career path. And I will just put her email in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to email her. And yeah, I guess if nobody has anything else to say, we will finish this up. Thank you so much again to the speakers and everybody who came for making this a great event. Thank you so much. And I will put that email in the chat for everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Thanks for having me. It
Thank
was
you,
great.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much for having me.
You guys, bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking.